Welcome, class, to this week's Latinx Studies and Origin of Latinx Communities. First, for this class, I want to give you an intro to a lot of these terms I'm going to be using throughout the weeks, and just give you an introduction to some of the terms and a little bit of early history. And that's how this class is going to be, cultivating from period to period, leading up to maybe the 20th century. So first, I want to talk about imperialism. Refers to the policy and ideology where a nation extends its power and dominance over countries of territory, often through colonization, military force, economical influences. And these are some of the things that we're seeing today in terms of how the U.S. in particular within this country has control over countries, right? And especially now with the president that we have now, but also with past presidents as well. Here, giving you a bit of a historical context, imperialism didn't start maybe 10, 20 years ago. It goes way back to the 19th century, 20th century, such as the European, the Britain, France, how they landed within other countries as as we talk about migration, right? But also it wasn't about migration, it was also about controlling, right? Colonization and so forth. But also, again, right, and also we're talking about economic motivations. What was the purpose of that? What was the gainage of that? And also called the political strategist interest. This is why you saw different countries go different elsewhere. You saw the Spanish more gored towards the South and Central America and parts of Mexico. You saw France, a lot of that. And then you see a lot of within the European countries, such as Europe, mostly going to the US, right? As you see today, historical contents. Colonization is an age of exploitation, something even we see even today. But a lot of the big hit of age of exploitation wasn't within, Christopher Columbus, right? Where supposedly was trying to land in the U.S., but it didn't, and landed in islands, right? So, and also the second piece is the Spanish and Portuguese colonization, right? This is where we're seeing a lot of the indigenous people take a first hit. Even we see that even today within such places, Mexico, Central America, Brazil, and so forth, right? So what does that mean? Also, the impact of indigenous people, right? Loss of their language, their culture, anything that. And this is also we see the first steps of Christianity come into place as well. Even as we talk with the later in the future within some of the classes, we also talk about what happened to a lot of these indigenous people, what happened to their language. And also, what does it mean for them when they migrate to? One of the things I would say that the hardest part of a lot of the indigenous people migrating is when they get caught, right, by the border patrol or even Mexico or any place, language barrier. This is one of the hardest part when these people of the indigenous people get caught. They're having a hard time getting out, talking to them, and so forth. But why? Because nobody speaks their language or understands even their culture, right? And also what came out of the colonization was African slavery in the economic that is used today. And that labor is still used today, but we just don't call it slavery anymore. We just call it cheap labor, essentially. So talking about more of the capitalism, now more on an international level, we're talking about global system, the way we're integrating the market and so forth. A lot of that, we see that today, even with the phones that we use today, how these parts are being made in and elsewhere, right? Such as the parts are made in China, India, and so forth, right? Or even if we're looking at more of the newer contents of driverless cars, right? A lot of these batteries that is made for Teslas are mining in some of these regions of people in their backyard, right? So what does also mean in a global level, an environmental level as well. So this is where I'm talking about international capitalism, exploitation of labor and issue, the environmental impact, exploitation, and cultural homogenization. So when we start reading some of the first reading that I gave you, I gave it in order. Some of these things that are talking about in the first reading is talking about even how the word Hispanic came into play, right? And now the only reason that Hispanics came into play is how do we categorize a certain people, and this was meant for brown folks, because a lot of if you look at the history within the Mexican folks, right, they were considered whites. So then at that one point, the country was kind of like fed up and was like, never mind, we need to give them a different name so they can vote for. This is where the term Hispanic came through. This is why here I'm stating the U.S. Bureau, more than 20 different nationalities are now collective grieving as two designations, right? Hispanics. But nonetheless, right, even after so many years, over such as Puerto Ricans and Mexicans, especially within the Mexicans here in Los Angeles, even Texas and further south, say like, they had a stop to this, right? This is why their own ideology, right? This is where Chicano came from, or Chicanx, Chicana, and so forth. So Baruica, this is where the identity comes from. It wasn't something that just came out of the blue, out of a nickname and so forth. This came back to identity, right? What does it mean to proclaim your own self and not somebody calling you that you are Hispanic and so forth? And this is where I also mean when breaking down identity, right? Goes far back to, when I was speaking about the Spanish. This is why it's also tense when we talk about racism that happened in the U.S. Not necessarily. Racism happened even throughout, the South, especially with Spain, right? When we are talking about how broken down the Casa system was, right? So the Casa system, even for here, it talks about as breaking down in more than 16 different levels, right? Who's white, who's brown, who's black, who's indigenous, broken down to the furthest lowest, right? And this was part of the Spanish did, is making sure that, if you were Spanish, you were elite, and if you were mixed, then never mind, then you lost some titles and so forth, right? But this is where it comes in terms of privileges and so forth too, right? And this happened primarily in a lot of it in Mexico. So in speaking about the second reading, Hispanic, Latino, Latinidad, some of the important things that came off of it was with President Lyndon Johnson first introduced this, I was talking about earlier, the Hispanic heritage, 1968, and then Reagan did it again, 1988, right? And this is again, right? These are being pronounced to use, but also used for voting. Not necessarily like Reagan did anything positive, for the people. Yes, I would say as a Central American, people from El Salvador were happy with Reagan, but nonetheless, people understand that also Reagan sent a lot of weapons to El Salvador. So that's another contrary aspect when we look at presidents such as Ronald Reagan, right? This is what also, again, right, the term Hispanic was created in the U.S. government in the 1970s to classify Spanish-speaking people. And then later on, we see stuff simply refer as Latino, Latina, because Hispanic emphasized a connection with Spain, rather than indigenous roots in Latin America. On the last reading, we're talking about Latino, Latina, Latinx, with the O and the A have included slashes between men to register as two possible genders possibilities, but Latino, Latina, and the spelling of both genders articulations such as Latina and Latino, right? So this is where we're breaking down even more this barrier of Latino, right? Because it's not gender neutral at all, right? And you see that throughout when new people speak about it, and this is where, like, again, right, I was speaking about the term Chicano, Chicana, how that emerged, where it came from, right? And this came from a lot of the 60s, right, from the walkouts. And we'll see those little documentaries of the students walking out. Why were they protesting, right? Why, such as the name Baruica came into influence as well. And we'll learn more about the Brown Berets as well within this class. But this is letting you know what these readings are telling you about, how this is pushed back to a lot of these terms that was coming from an administration, essentially. So this is why Alan Lopez talks about the Latinx, right? And he kind of breaks it down into this four key pieces: the wood of settlement, the wood of anti-blackness, the wood of femicide, and the wood of articulation, right? In education, we use the Latinx, Chicanx, but also people have used Latine, Latino, in terms of a gender neutral as well. But also a lot of these terms is to this fight back, right? When we are not settling to this gender neutral aspect. So Latinx is talking about, the wound, right? The acknowledgement, because it's the center unifying Latinidad, a center of indigenous people, Christopher Columbus and the island Hispania, Haiti, Dominican Republic, some of the history that I was talking about earlier, the wound of anti-blackness. You see that throughout European, but also through the Spanish. It's always been against, black folks, within slavery and so forth. And we do even that today within our own people, I would say, when I have challenged my own family and they were looking at the black community, even black folks, Unfortunately, I've also seen within my own family, their fathers, I'm not speaking to their fathers, right? Because they've been anti-black, So this is a lot of that bad practices that has come, but also comes in not just from 10 years, 20 years ago. This is a period where this is historically been taught, been anti-blackness. And this is why Alan Alan Pales, that talks about the wound of anti-blackness. And also he speaks about the wound of femicide, right? Talking about how important this violence against women is not really paying attention to how much homicide how much homicide is happening. Speaking about 33 countries that speak about women that deal with women, but none of these people are hold it accountable, right? The word of interculation. Sorry for my language. The X is is an intervention of queer, trans, feminist, Black, Indigenous, Latinx subcultures have developed addressing the four wounds, right? So this is primarily an introduction to what the class is going to be, a lot of these terms. But again, going forward, I am going to go into different readings and periods where we're going to talk about, as you can see within the syllabus, in a timeline format.